I was 14 years old when the war ended. And I remember I was in grammar school, and they announced that the war was over. The armistice was signed, and they called everyone up in the assembly hall, and they all cheered at us like that. And they had a big bell. They rang that big bell, boom, boom, you know, to celebrate the end of the war. And World War I was known as the war to end all wars. And World War I was fought mainly in the trenches. The idea was there'd be long lines of soldiers, one line after the other, so many yards or apart from each other. See, the first line trenches would be facing the enemy, and they were in the same way in trenches, the Germans. And the expression was over the top. That means when the command was, everybody got up, they had their bayonets fixed on them, they went over the top or out of their trenches against the enemy who was shooting at them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the first line. After that, there was maybe 3 or 4 more lines of men following them. So the first line probably got all killed off. And the idea was to get to the trenches and kill that German in that trench with your bayonet, quick, before he gets you, see? Maybe 1 or 2 like that. And then the second line came along. By that time, well, the Germans were probably doing the same thing. So it was one massacre after another, you know, line after line. And so many men were killed all the time. It was a terrible war. Of course, behind them came the tanks making to take over. In this country, at that time, 1917, 18, there was a big influenza epidemic, the flu. They call it the flu. Soldiers, even civilians, everybody, young people like you, were dying. I remember the first draft, the first ones were 21 years and old. 21 to 31 were drafted. They signed up to be drafted. And then they were called, at first they called all the single men, see? And then later, if they needed, they give you a number. I just got out of it. I was too young for World War I and too old for World War II, in my case. But then in France, in the trenches, the Germans were using gas, mustard gas they call it. They spray it, and a lot of men died from that, inhaling all that, get into their lungs and kill them all, thousands of men. They used everything they could just to kill the enemy. In other words, get him before he gets you. That was the idea. France and England, they weren't even prepared for war. See? But Germany was prepared for war way ahead of all these years, and they were afraid that Germany was afraid of the Russians, because Russia was so big, you know, such a big country. But Russians weren't prepared for war either. But Germany was so afraid that they were in the middle. Germany, you look at the map of Germany, Russia on one side, France and England on, even though England was an island. So in other words, the Germans were preparing for war all the time. They were war-minded. They had a big population in Germany, very large population of people. They knew how to make war material, machine guns and all that stuff. They were famous for that anyway, see? And militaristic people. 1, 2, 3, 4. There was always that type of people. They thought nobody was like them. But in World War I, Kaiser was the emperor, they call him. Yeah, he was the head man in Germany. Well, I don't know how much power he had. And Germany had big ships too, big battleships. And the Allies sunk one of I think it was the Bismarck. They managed to sink the Bismarck on Germany, and they lost thousands of men on that. But the Germans sunk a lot of the Allied ships. And the United States didn't go into the war until after they started sinking ships. The American, any ship that they were going to bring in supplies to Europe, South America here, especially the United States, sending ammunition, who knows. So the United States, President Wilson decided to declare war on Germany because of that. And as a matter of fact, 1 or 2 of their submarines came all the way to near New York, and they sank 1 or 2 ships there. But Japan was on the Germans, side. They were allies. Although they didn't come into the war, China was on one of the United States allies. China and South America, Mexico. But in this country, we had war bonds. They were selling war bonds, $25 for a war bond. As kids in school, we were buying war bond stamps, 25 cents for one stamp. See, so in other words, we were sacrificing candy and stuff like that to buy our stamp. While those were, they would try to buy one 25-cent stamp each week, or whatever you could, and they gave it to you on a card, like, see, in school. See, I remember one of the barbers looked drafted, but they turned them down. You had flat feet. You have to have good feet so you could march, you know. You had to be good physical condition. And I remember another man, he happened to be an Irishman, I remember. He was turned down physically because he didn't pass the physical to be drafted in the United States. So he joined the Canadian Army, and the Canadians took everybody, see. Canada was on the United States failure our side. They sent a lot of money soldiers to Europe too. During the war, you could write a letter. You didn't have to put a stamp on it. A certain envelope, red, white, and blue trim. As long as it went to the army, you had to say, you couldn't say where, you had to say somewhere in France. See that? Because they knew, the army knew where they were, see. But he would get it, see. But, and he could say the same thing when he wrote back, somewhere in France, see. He could tell you where he was. General Pershing was the big American general, Pershing. All this World War I started with a Duke. He was shot. He and his wife were shot. Then one thing after another, with all that going on, Germany took advantage of all that trouble going on to organize and start their big fight, see. But France didn't want to fight. They tried to make peace with Germany, not to bother, but Germany went ahead anyway. They were determined to win. They went to Belgium, took over the whole country, Belgium and Holland, all those countries. Just walked right in and took them all. Before they figured, do that before the French or the English get there, see. That's all it was, like, get your enemy before he gets you. So they were doing it the same way. That was Germany's idea. Get in there before they even get started. I can remember everything was about the Kaiser. But he was only like a king. He had no power, no nothing. He was like a figure. But he was in all those pictures. He had a mustache, was pointed up like that. He would curl the ends. Always in a uniform. And I remember saying that he had one arm was limp. He didn't have he had a limp arm, sort of. So he had a uniform that fitted him and looked good. But the German, Bismarck and all those other Germans, they were really running the country. More people died from the flu in America than they died as in the war. The flu was so bad, so terrible. But the French and the Germans, they lost a lot of soldiers in that. They were fighting all the time.
Any posters that encouraged you to get into the war?
Posters everywhere. Uncle Sam pointing his finger. I want you. You've probably seen them, sir.
Yep.
Uncle Sam, I want you, it used to be. And posters about buying war bonds. Buying war bonds. All the time, everywhere you went. Radio stations here, wherever there was a billboard, all the billboards were about the war. Buy victory bonds, buy war bonds, all that. The Red Cross. They would show pictures of a nurse too, you know. Help USA, you know, things like that. They were pushing that all the time. Now they used to have what they call rallies. You could buy war bond out of your paycheck, you know. Yeah, they take it out of your pay where you worked. The factories were working day and night, 24, never stopped. People were working 8-hour shifts. A lot of women were working in the factory. Oh, a lot of women. A lot of these factories on machines, making bullets or whatever. They were making machine guns on raw material. Everything that pertained to war. Everything else that didn't amount, that had nothing to do with the war, stopped. Like building and fancy stuff, you know. Everything had to be war material. They used to save the metal scrap, lead and brass and things like that. They would save metal to make ammunition, you know, to make tanks and guns, and nothing had to be wasted. Everything had to be salvaged.
Did you know when they declared war on Germany?
We didn't have radios in those days, you know. No radios, no television, no nothing. Just an old graphonola, maybe. Everything was newspapers. I mean, like the first thing, I remember one kid downtown in Hartford. You know the old state houses on Main Street in Hartford?
Yeah.
There was a big newsstand there, up around on the sidewalk, big white sidewalk. And he always had the newspapers, you know, New York papers, Hartford. Those we had Hartford Times and Hartford Current and a New York Herald, different newspapers. And he always had them piled here. When people go by, they would buy the newspapers. Oh, the Hartford Times was 3 cents, I remember, 3 times. Maybe the New York Times, maybe they were 5, but you could always read the headlines. And the one newspaper, the New York Telegram they call it, their front sheet was a pale, a yellow sheet, not really orange yellow like sheet, the first page. And I can remember before it was started, it said, "Someday Japan will declare war on the United States." I never forgot that. Nobody even thought of Japan. All around Hartford, everywhere. In Hartford, the Hartford Times used to have a bulletin on 3 corners wherever they could. Oh, it was only about that size. Well, just the headlines of what was going on. I think England built their navy because they got water all around them. See, the English Channel and North Sea. So they built up a very strong navy. The English Navy blockaded all of Germany's ports. So they couldn't get out. But they get out by submarines underneath. The Germans, they outsmarted the English. And the submarines were all up and down the Atlantic Ocean. The newspapers used to have cartoons about the Kaiser. John Bull was the English character, and the French, I forget what the French general looked like now. And they had the Italian general there with his mustache and the cartoons. You know, Wilson was something about peace there. Oh, League of Nations. He didn't want a war, and he was reelected on a peace program. No war. A second term. See, as we get in, Germans sinking our ships. So the people naturally said, "Hey, we got to get after that. We got to get after it." But the Germans were out sinking with their submarines, sinking the ships in the Atlantic Ocean. The guns they use today are so different. And in the old days, they didn't have the machines. They had the machine guns were called Browning, and they were made in Hartford. Colt's factory were making Browning machine guns for the army at that time, and they had to have the machine gun had a shell around the rifle part. It had water in it to keep it cool. See, and actually, when you keep that barrel of the gun is going to get hot. See, they used to have water in there to help keep it cool. And then actually, all the men were drafted because only the young men were drafted in the army up to 31. See, and then I think it went up to 35 later, and the war got going. But women took over a lot of the jobs that the young men had here and there, all kinds of work, especially in factories. I remember down in New London where they make submarines. I was down there. My sister used to live there. I was there one time when the factory came out. I was amazed how many thousands of women, or hundreds of women that would come out on the ship, coming out of the factory. Oh, in those days, people were knitting scarves.
Knitting
scarves? Boys.
Really?
For the soldiers. You can use them.
Oh, really?
You know, woolen scarves. Because it was for the soldiers. You would go to the, I don't know what, they would give you the yarn and the needles, and you would go home and you make your scarf. Well, the Red Cross and the Salvation Army were very prominent. They used to distribute coffee and donuts to the soldiers. The First World War and the Second World War was saved by the United States entering the war.